Super. Okay, so we're sort of starting. I guess we're sort of starting. I just want to say hello to everyone, even as our attendee room is still filling up. Welcome to the Hybrid Publishing and Author Experience webinar. My name is Maggie Langrick, and I'm the publisher at Wonderwell. I'm really honored to have with me here today Angie Tuglus, who is the author of Transformable, this wonderful book that we just published a couple of weeks ago on May 11th, I think was your pub date, right, Angie?
Yeah, May 11th, not that long ago.
It's still hot off the presses. So thank you all so much for joining in. And like I said, we just really love to hear from our community. So please don't be shy to say hello in the chat. Feel free to chat with each other too. A couple of housekeeping items before we sort of really get started, just to give you an idea of like how this is going to all unfold. Angie and I are basically going to interview each other. So we'll start off with me asking Angie questions about what it was like to, write and publish a book and become a published author. And then she's going to turn the tables and put me in the hot seat and ask me some questions about the publishing landscape, how it works, what the options are, how it all fits together, and how to make decisions that are right for you. If you're considering writing a book and wondering what the best way to go about it will be. I'm also going to have some slides to share to illustrate how it all works. And then toward the end, we'll open it up for a 10-minute Q&A. Our plan is to get through all of this within 60 minutes. And so, as I said, some of you have sent in questions ahead of time, and thank you for that. For those of you that didn't, you are going to have a chance to ask your own. You can ask me questions about publishing. You can ask Angie questions about what her journey was like or what it felt like to write her book and all of that. So just go ahead and put them in the chat. We're not using the raise hands feature today. We're also not using the Q&A. We're just using the chat. I just also wanted to let you know that we have a couple of helpers on this webinar as well. We've got Jasmine Cham is helping with the technical stuff, and Sarah McDonough. You'll see us all as co-hosts. Sarah's going to be handling interactions and just monitoring the chat, and can answer, if you're having technical issues or anything, you can just send either of those a direct message or put it in the chat. Also wanted to mention that we are recording this webinar, and we're going to send you out a link to view the recording afterward. But for those of you who are actually live on the call today, do stick around because we'll have a special offer for those of you who are here with us in person. Okay, so on with the show. I'm actually going to just stop screen sharing for a sec. All right, hey Angie. Okay, so this is your moment. Yeah, congratulations on writing your first book, Transformable, and becoming a published author. It's such an amazing accomplishment. It's a real pleasure for me to see people go through this journey. Start out with the expectations, and then having that that moment of arrival where your book is real and it's in your hands and it's in stores. So let's hear from you about what it was like. Briefly first. Can you tell us a little bit about the book itself?
Yeah, so the book is about how to successfully lead a business transformation of any variety: digital transformation, operational transformation, product, culture, any type of transformation of the business. And
what was it that, what makes you an expert on this topic? How do people know that to take your advice?
It's not just made up out of thin air?
Yeah, it sounds like it's either that or the Great American Novel. What made you write on this topic?
Well, now that you put it like that, I don't know if I made the right. Okay. No, so my whole career is basically business transformations of all types in different industries, different functions, global nature, cross-functional. And I was doing so many of them that over time that I realized there's a pattern, even though they all sound different, they felt different, that underneath how to actually execute them successfully was I was using the same principles again and again. And people would ask about them at conferences and other places. They'd say, did you write anything? Can I read something? Can I learn about it from somewhere? And I'd have to say no. Well, now I don't have to say no anymore.
Just send them the link to purchase.
Right.
That's awesome. And your book is, I love this book. I loved reading it. I read it through several, of the stages of editing, and then of course, have seen the finished result. And I have to say, as a person who reads a lot of business books, but is not deeply steeped in sort of large organizational transformations, I found it incredibly understandable. And how how I pitched this book when I was presenting it to our distributor and our sales team was that this is a book that is both practical and fun to read. And I think that that's what really sets it apart. What do you think makes your book different from other books on business transformation?
So two things. One is that it's about how to actually lead one. Most business books are either case studies that are more high level, or they're like detailed checklists, right? Like follow all these steps. It sits right in the middle for anyone who's trying to lead one and trying to understand what's really going on inside of one with the people and the politics and how to actually make it all come together. So that's one thing. The other thing is that it's a bit fun. And that's something that I was very deliberate about, was I did not want to write another boring business book. Because
Thank you.
The world
Thank
has,
you for that.
yeah, the world has way too many boring business books. So I learned to draw stick figures. I'm more of an artist of oil paints and things like that, but I learned to draw stick figures so that I could draw my own comics and illustrations for it to really bring it to life with a bit of humor instead of having just words after words on the pages.
I love that, and it's a great example. First of all, yeah, I have to say, absolutely, you hit the nail on the head with your intention, which was to make it apprehensible and relatable and digestible. I really found that because the book is about principles that are constant, it was just so it was easy to understand how it would be applied in a real world situation, and the comics just make it really distinctive and unique. It's a great differentiator, and we're gonna, for those of you who are watching, we're going to be getting into the design elements of the bookmaking process a little bit later, but it's a very good example of how any expert can really mine their own personality and personal sort of skill set, whether that's your sense of humor, whether that's some sort of artistic thing, to bring some differentiation. We are not out here writing a forgettable corporate white paper. We are out here to, write a book that is ours with our name on it and to have it be recognizably ours and distinct. So that's great. Okay, let me ask you a couple questions about the book writing process. How long did it take to write this manuscript?
That's an interesting question. So first, it took me 3 months to write a really solid draft. And then I started asking peers basically to review an early version. So other CIOs and COOs, other executives, other chief marketing officers, like a whole variety of people. And I had probably over a dozen people actually review my book really early in the process. And so then there was another maybe 3 months of that, of like talking to people and revising it and shaping it. And then then I met you. And so I started looking for actually like, okay, this is real. Like I want to do this. And it took another year to get to market, which I was surprised by at first.
Yeah, and I think we're going to get into that a little bit more later on. But even just the writing of the manuscript itself was a good 3 months.
I'd say 6 to 7 months of a lot of my time though.
Yeah. And that is quite typical. It's actually on the fast end of things. I think the fastest we've ever seen an author go from, start to finish is about 4 months. And that was a really unusual situation. We've seen people take 9 months or longer just to crank out their first draft. So was it like, I don't know, emotionally harder or like intellectually harder than you thought it would be to get the words out, or did it flow? What was that? What did it feel like?
It wasn't harder. It didn't feel harder than I thought, but it took a lot longer than I thought. But I didn't really have any real perception going into it. But it did. I do a lot of iterations on it, even before I met Wonderwell. Like I did a lot of iterations, and so it was kind of this thing where, like, I'd write it and then I'd think about it and I'd be like, does that really convey what I wanted to convey? And then I'd write it some more and change it up, and then I'd look at it again. I'd be like, oh, people could misinterpret this, and then I'd do it again. And yeah, there's a lot of that.
Did you go from start to finish and then go in and revise, or did you like loop back and forth all along the way?
I initially wrote in chunks of topic, like different concepts. And that's one of the nice things about the book too, is you can just pick it up and read a little bit and then drop it and pick it up and read the next chunk, because it chunks out nicely in the pieces. That's how I wrote it, actually, is I wrote it in different pieces, different concepts. Now so here, let's think about pitfalls. And there's this just technology pitfall. And I'd be like, okay. And I'd have this whole set of notes on that. And then I think that's how I was able to do it relatively quickly too, is I'd pick up whatever topic I was interested early on in the process and work on it more.
That's interesting. So it sounds like you took a kind of like a, I don't know, deconstructed approach rather than starting with a really clear outline. You kind of just dove into whatever was most developed in your mind. And then did you just assemble it later, or?
Yeah, it started forming into 5 phases. And so, yeah, I assembled it later, and I didn't even write the intro or the conclusion until much later.
That's pretty normal and actually advisable. I think that people who start writing the intro first can really wind up getting stuck in a sort of a tide pool of rumination. It can be really, we often recommend that people write the introduction last, actually. What about the editing process? So you came to us, you had a draft manuscript. It was complete. There was a beginning, middle, and end, and none of the planned content was completely missing, although it changed a lot in the editing process. So talk to me and talk to our guests a little bit about what that felt like. First of all, just like logistically, how did you and your editor collaborate, and what was it like to have someone give you critical feedback on your writing? Yeah,
so there's a lot more involved than I anticipated.
There's you thought it was just going to be run it through spell check and you're done.
Well, I didn't think it would be that easy, but I didn't realize there was a whole set of professionals around this. Right, there wasn't just one editor either. There were multiple editors, and the first editing was really structural, almost like, does this all fit together? Are you connecting the dots where you should? Like you say this, you talk about this 5 different times, but not always the same way throughout the book, like that kind of thing. So Jessica, my editor, she was very comprehensive, and so at first you get back your manuscript, and there's like a gazillion notes on every single page about how you could be better at your writing. Which is good, because I'm not a professional writer. I've never written anything anywhere near this long before. Not even, probably not since school when I had to write papers, and they were still very short relatively. So it was good to have all that. It was also overwhelming. And then I had to step back and connect dots, and I had all different colored markers for different parts of it, and had to print it out and think through it. And it was worth it, but it was a lot more than I anticipated to pull it all together.
And in the end, do you think that improved the book? Were you generally in accord with her recommendations, or did you have arguments over creative decisions? How did that pan out?
I was mostly in accord. And some of the things I just trusted her because I didn't really have an opinion on it. So she's like, you should be consistent in how you open your chapters. That sounds logical. I should probably be consistent in how I open my chapters.
Yeah, and it's amazing how an editor, a sounding board like that, can help us to see, where our blind spots are. Like as you pointed out, the fact that she said, well, you mentioned this topic, 5 different times, but each time in a different way, let's harmonize it. And then okay, yeah, I guess we should call it this, or think of it in that way. And those are the kinds of things that we sometimes just don't see because it's just all, it's all cohesive in our minds, right? Yeah. Angie, I get a lot of people when they first come to me talking about their book, they're sometimes, especially first-time writers like you, they're not always sure about whether they should attempt to write it themselves or hire a ghostwriter or have some sort of, hands-on help even in that first draft. So did you consider working with a ghostwriter? If not, why not?
I never considered actually using a ghostwriter, and I wanted to really tell it my own voice, but more importantly, I wanted to create something. And my career has been a lot of time as an executive mostly, and you do a lot of delegating there. And I didn't want to delegate my book. I actually wanted to create the book.
And I totally, you have your thumbprint on this book in a more detailed and visible way, I think, than a lot of authors do. So this might be a good time for us to talk about design and talk about the illustrations in your book. Tell us a little bit about that. What did you learn, through the process of engaging with the book's designer and how to integrate your illustrations? Yeah,
so there's a lot more involved in that than I ever would have guessed, in terms of the typesetting and setting out the illustrations and figuring out so there was one thing of teaching myself to draw what I wanted to draw out of my head. So that was a big enough journey. But then the next journey was, okay, they need to be a certain resolution. They need to match up in a certain way with the other drawings. They need to fit into certain boxes so that they don't look weird against the text. And so, if I write another book and there are illustrations, then I'll be a lot more prepared to up front to know how to actually create them technically, not just getting the ideas down into images.
I think you have some pages to share with us too. You're going to walk us through that a little bit.
Let's look at a couple pages. So if I share this, then, so here are a couple pages spread from the book. And this is the opening to chapter 2, preparation. And you can see there are a lot of decisions that went into this, that if you would just ask me before this whole process, are you going to have to, how much time we have to spend thinking about how the book lays out, I would have guessed a lot less time. But I also really wanted to look as I have strong creative desires to understand, to drive things a certain way. So even so the gray tone behind the image, above the number 2 had to be thought about, do we do that? Do we not? How big does that image need to be? And things like the font too, is this the right font? Is it the right size? Should it be bold? Should it not? And then you see on the right side, there are these other images that get embedded between the text. So, how do they lay out? Do they end up sitting nicely amongst the text? Are there too many together? And this was a debate I had many times with Maggie and Jessica. I wanted to put a lot of drawings into the book, and I think it came out really well, though. There may not be quite as many drawings as I was trying to shove into it, but I learned that you can only fit so many into a space at a time, and they should be gathered in certain ways.
Yeah, you want the content to be balanced and for it all to just create a harmonized, pleasant reading experience. So I think that what we have here is a really, really good mix. And yeah, it's interesting looking at the chapter opener where it says number 2, preparation. We had several discussions about how to arrange this page, right? There was at one point, the upper panel was a little deeper. The number of the chapter number was in a round circle or not in a round circle. There were different ways to arrange it. And these are a lot of things that people take for granted when they're not really familiar with book design, but understanding that even things like where the running head at the top of the page where it says 54 transformable, those things are not set in stone. They're not automatic. Every single one of these elements, the placement of the number on the page and the font that is used, all of that is a decision that the designer makes. And under our model, the author has an opportunity to participate in that decision. People they have different levels of interest in participating in that. But it was great working with you because you really did have a clear vision in mind. And so what we've got is a really richly textured book here.
Yeah, it looks great.
So Angie, let's talk for a second about your publishing options. When you set about to you're like, okay, I'm going to do that book that I've been dreaming of and thinking of. I need to get it published. How am I going to do that? What was your process for researching your options and making that decision?
Well, I started like most people would, go online and just start researching through searches on the internet, and that clarified certain things, but it also made a lot more confusing as to the whole spectrum of publishing. And then I started talking to some friends. I knew some people who'd had books published. I knew some people who just recently done it, even through friends of friends, and started talking to them to understand what they actually did and why they chose to do that and who they worked with and why they worked with them. And that helped a lot in figuring it out.
I think that I can appreciate that for first timers, who are new to the industry, the internet research must be really confusing. I mean, when I go around and, I'm always aware of what people are sharing around publishing information, and most of what is in our heads is about traditional publishing. You're thinking about agents, you're thinking about, sort of advances and royalties and that kind of thing, book proposals. But then when you look online, most of the advice you find is simply geared towards self-publishing. This is sort of here's how to make an ebook, and here's how, It's like, no, I just need to stand back and understand what the options are. And then there's hybrid publishing, which is, we're going to go into in greater depth when it's my turn to explain that. But hybrid publishing is, this third way. And Angie, what was it that drew you to hybrid publishing as a model?
Yeah, I'm glad you're going to talk about that for everyone, because it was super confusing. And ultimately, I wanted control over my content and my image. And with traditional, and then also, even with traditional publishers, the author still has to do a lot of work, including promotional work. So it wasn't like that much of a benefit in my mind to even consider that route. Especially once I learned that it takes an entire team of professionals to actually produce a really quality book.
And okay, so, and you chose Wonderwell. We were awfully glad that you did, and so proud to be your publisher. Can I ask you to tell us a little bit about what it was like to work with us as a company? And
absolutely.
Yeah.
So Wonderwell, you guys brought a great team to the table, and I love how you really listened to what I was trying to accomplish with the book. Even when you asked me great questions about like strategic things that I was doing with the book that I actually had no plans for. Like, that was good too, where you're like, a lot of people try to do this with their books. So I'm like, well, that's nice to know, but actually, no, that doesn't actually fit me. And you're really good at listening instead of trying to box me into something that, you'd seen elsewhere. And that was really important and really helpful for me with my vision. I also love that Wonderwell is this small woman-owned business, and you brought this just great team together in a very collaborative, kind of like intimate way, almost like you felt like, I didn't feel like I was just a cog in the machine.
That's great to hear. That's exactly what we strive for. So thank you for that.
All right, cool. So on that note, is it time to hear more about Wonderwell and hybrid publishing? Because I'm sure people want to understand this confusing world.
Yeah, I think it is. Absolutely. So I am going to launch into a little bit of just a sort of a background or presentation, and then so we're gonna unspotlight Angie, and I'm gonna share my screen, and then Angie will be asking me questions. Okay, just here we go. Yep. Okay, there we go. Okay, so before I get into this explanation, I just want to give a little bit of context. I'm the publisher and CEO at Wonderwell. We are a premium hybrid publisher for creators, experts, and visionary brands. Our company provides support to authors at all stages of their publishing journey, from concept development through writing coaching and editorial support, all the way through to production, publication, and marketing. I founded the company in 2013. We were then known as Lifetree Media. And since then, the books that we have published have placed on national bestseller lists. They have been translated into multiple languages and won peer-reviewed awards. We strictly publish books that are nonfiction and focus on categories that help, heal, and inspire. That ranges from business books, such as Angie's, to parenting, health and wellness, personal development, and a little bit of memoir, although we're really highly selective in the memoir category. Overall, our mission is to make life more rewarding for authors and for readers. So I'm assuming that those of you who are joining on this call are here because you yourself have a book in mind that you want to write and get published, and your biggest decision will be which path to take. You may have, you heard Angie and I talk about various options. I'm going to go into those a little bit to explain the differences between them. So the first one that we all know so much about, which I mentioned, was, traditional publishing. And in a nutshell, what traditional publishing is, it's also thought of as gatekeeper publishing, because the publisher is the one who must select the authors. As an author, you can't just stroll in and say, I want you to be my publisher. They have to choose you. Essentially, a traditional publisher acquires your rights, and they develop your manuscript into a product, the book, that then they own. That is, that they are the owner of that product to sell and profit from. And they also take that product to market by distributing it into stores, including online retailers. So basically, under the traditional model, you're licensing your content to the publisher, and they invest in turning it into a product. and in return, they pay you a royalty. And this works great for people who, really need that level of investment and someone else to pick them up and make their book happen for them. The way to get published by a traditional publisher is you need an agent, typically, although some smaller publishers will take direct submissions. And for the nonfiction books, you need to have a book proposal ready, which is sort of like a content plan and business plan for your book. It costs you nothing to begin, but you do have to be selected, and you will pay for marketing. And very often authors will pay for book proposal development because the book proposal is extremely important. It's a professional document. It's hard to develop one on your own if you aren't familiar with it. Some authors who publish traditionally also pay for their own editorial support while they're writing, and their own ghostwriters if they're using one. The second option, which is getting so much attention these days just because it's just available to all and very, very popular, has really changed the industry, is self-publishing. In self-publishing, there is still a publisher. It's you, the author. You play all of the roles that the publisher plays and assume all of their responsibilities. That means that you develop the manuscript or hire people and manage them to develop that manuscript into a product that then you own because you have invested in it and you have done all the work. You will make the book available to the market. And as a self-published author, your only route to market really is through e-commerce websites like Amazon, through using print-on-demand technology. Authors who are self-publishing typically cannot get their book distributed into stores. And the reasons for that are just too numerous and complex to go into, but essentially it means that you're selling your book online only. You will pay for everything, and and you'll also earn all of the proceeds from sale after the retailer discount and the POD printing costs. And there's the little box that tells you all that I just spoke. The third option is hybrid publishing. That's what we do. It is a cross between traditional and self-publishing. Essentially, a hybrid publisher does everything that a traditional publisher does, but doing it on an author finance business model, which is more akin to self-publishing. So we're kind of like a traditional publisher for hire. Authors will pay the hybrid publisher to develop your manuscript into a book for you, and then the hybrid publisher distributes it into stores on your behalf. But because you have been the underwriter of that product, you also make most of the money proceeds from sales, and pay the hybrid publisher a distribution fee for getting the book to market.
Maggie, talk more about control too, like how much control the author has over their message and their voice in hybrid versus traditional.
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Angie. So, really, we are in a different relationship with our authors than a traditional publisher would be. Instead of, in the traditional space, the author is just supplying the raw material, and then the publisher is developing it. It's their product. And so the traditional publisher is going to make all of the decisions about how that product is developed, what it looks like, how it's positioned, how it's described, what the cover looks like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In our case, our relationship with our authors is more of a client and service provider relationship. So we're really here to fulfill our client's mission and vision for the book, but we also bring professional insight and knowledge and market experience to that. So we will always guide our authors, and if we think our author has an impulse or instinct that is counterproductive to their own goals, we will steer them in a better direction. But it's a much more collaborative process, and ultimately the author always has final sign-off on everything. That's something that a lot of our authors really, really appreciate, and it's a really big differentiator. I think that in this day and age of self-publishing, that's just that kind of level of control and ownership is something that people expect to have. We expect that in all kinds of areas of life now that perhaps we didn't in the past. So that's a really big difference.
Yeah, that was critical for me in choosing which path to go, is the idea of someone else like having a lot of control over what was my voice and changing it and doing whatever they wanted to. It was very unappealing.
Yeah, I mean, having said that, most traditional publishers, they are going to respect the author's voice, and that, but there can be, what I notice more when I hear authors complaining about having an unsatisfying experience with a traditional publisher, it's not so much that their book becomes something that they don't recognize, although that doesn't happen so much in the manuscript, but it can really happen in the cover, the description, and the marketing approach, you know, that basically how the book is positioned. And that can be really distressing for authors when they see like you have just misrepresented what this book is trying to be, and like the identity of the book just feels different. And the other place where I think a lot of authors who are traditionally published feel like they just feel ignored, or like they get short shrift. It's like, I don't know, I was being told like submit your manuscript, and then I did that, and then I didn't hear anything back from them until it was like time to go to market or whatever. They just don't feel as kind of shepherded along the way. So it's a big difference. I do want to mention that for those who are considering working with a hybrid publisher, I really want to urge you to go to the website of the Independent Book Publishers Association, ibpa.org, I think it is. I should know that, ibpaonline.org. I'm a member of the board there, and also was a part of the working group that developed this list of criteria for a bona fide hybrid publisher. We had a concern as a kind of an industry group that there are lots of people, new firms springing up using this term to describe what they do, when really what they were doing was assisted self-publishing or vanity press. And we felt it was really important to differentiate. So I'm not going to read through all of these 9 bullet points, but what you'll see when you look at them is that basically this just describes what a traditional publisher does, but on a different business model. We have to vet submissions. We don't just publish anything that people submit, even if it's trash. We publish under our own imprint, which makes us accountable as the publisher of record. We're adhering to industry standards and managing rights. But this one piece that I pulling out in orange, distribution is really, really critical. If you're working with someone who's calling themselves a hybrid publisher, what that means is that they must have access to all avenues and channels of the book trade, and that is, the retail market where books are bought and sold. So a word about that. This is really, I think, your first big fork in the road decision when you're trying to choose like traditional, hybrid, or self is, do you need to be in bookstores or not? And this is a really, really big and important question. Distribution is critical, and it's a very much misunderstood part of the publishing process. Most authors that I talk to really want to understand what it is, and they don't understand, like, why is it so hard to get a self-published book into stores, and whether or not that matters anymore these days. This is a big, big topic, which I give whole entire presentations on, but I'm just going to try to cut to the chase on this. The question is, like, if Amazon is everywhere, isn't that distribution? If I get my book into my own local bookstore, is that distribution? But essentially, what you need to understand is this. Distribution is a complex system of established relationships and infrastructure, warehouses and trucks. Mostly, it is a formal cycle of sales and fulfillment that is led by human beings, real sales reps that meet with retailers and buyers and present lists on a very regimented schedule that the whole entire industry adheres to. So this is why it's really impossible for a self-published author to distribute their own book comprehensively. There's just no way for one person with one book to meet with retailers and participate in that system formally. So as you can imagine, the book trade, by which I mean retailers, is a really competitive place. Shelf space is tight, and bookstores only want to sell titles that will sell. So your little book will be in there right alongside the heavyweights in the category, and persuading the retailer to stock it is just the first step. You also need to persuade customers to come in and buy that book off the shelf. What happens is, once that book is bought by the customer, the retailer sees that they have sold out on their inventory, and they will order more as long as that book continues to sell through. So it must have consumer appeal. So let's look at the qualities that you're, first of all, okay. So I wanted to mention to you, there are 2 ways that you can get into stores. You can't do it self-publishing. Traditional and hybrid are the 2 ways, and self-publishing won't get you there, and I've already explained why. Okay, so here are the qualities that your book needs to have in order for distribution to make sense for you. It needs to have consumer appeal, by which I mean, is this a topic that people typically buy books about in stores? Or is it a niche topic that it doesn't normally find its way to the shelf of your average Barnes & Noble? And it has to be able to offer something beyond what's already out there. So a new idea or great entertainment value. And it must have a way to reach consumers, or consumers need to have a way to find out about this book, ideally including people who don't already know you. And that's why traditional publishers really prefer signing new authors who already have a big platform and marketing plans. But so there has to be some way for consumers to know and discover this book. Beyond the book's qualities, your objectives are also going to factor into this decision. For those of you who have a serious ambition to become an author, a career author, perhaps of multiple books, you really ought to be in the book trade, because that is the sort of A game where all the action's taking place. Of course, you may not want these things. You may not care about, being in libraries or book clubs or in Costco. These are all parts of, the distribution ecosystem. If you want to be reviewed and eligible for awards and things, you need to be in bookstores typically, or to have a shot at making onto the New York Times bestseller list. But if these things don't matter to you, then distribution may not be appropriate. So, for example, if your book is primarily a marketing tool for your business or your product, it may not be necessary for you to be in stores. Doesn't mean that you can't or shouldn't be in stores, but it may not strictly be necessary. If you're writing the book because you want it to be a product that you will sell and make money from, then bookstores might not be the best place for you, because those are lower margin sales. And finally, if your topic is only of interest to a small group of readers, it's not going to be a candidate for book distribution. And this isn't about its quality. It's really about, for example, it might be the history of your town or something, that's really just not of broad interest. That is probably better done as a self-published book. And actually this last one, and this is important, you need to be really honest with yourself about this. If your book has limited originality, you might have perfectly good information in there, but it might not really offer something that is truly new or better than the books that are published already in stores. You may want to just consider whether you should be selling this directly to your followers, clients, and fans. So I do have so Jasmine is telling me that I'm running out of time, and this means that I need to kind of breeze through this next bit. So I want to talk to you for a second about what this boils down to basically is your sales potential. You're going to sell your book one of two ways. You're either going to sell it to consumers through bookstores, and including Amazon, or you're going to sell it directly. And that means, if you're a speaker, you're selling it at the back of the room at your speaking events, or perhaps you're selling it directly to your customers or clients or other people in your life. And you need to evaluate those two sort of avenues to sales, because one is more appropriate to certain channels than the other. So if you have strong consumer appeal, traditional and hybrid are the best ways for you to go, because you want to be in bookstores. If your sales potential is primarily through your own direct efforts, then self-publishing that leans towards self-publishing as a choice. If you have consumer and direct sales appeal, hybrid is better monetarily, and I can't really get into the breakdown why, but that will be better for you because you can capitalize on both of those appropriately through hybrid, better than you can if you are traditionally published or self-published. And if the answer is neither, that you don't really have strong sales potential in either of those areas, then, and don't laugh, because some people just really honestly do not, self-publishing is really your best option, and you should do that as cheaply as possible and consider it a passion project. So that's kind of how that boils down. I'm going to quickly talk about what you will earn. According to, I think it's the Authors Guild was the most recent, where I got this from. Typical traditional publisher royalty these days is about 15% of net. And net receipts, that means that's the amount the publisher receives from the bookstore. Of course, if you're self-publishing, then you're receiving 100% of the proceeds, minus, of course, what the retailer takes and the cost of the print-on-demand production. IBPA guidelines say that hybrid publisher, in order to call themselves that, must pay a royalty of at least 50% of net, and Wonderwell actually pays 60%. Now, there's one thing that I want to point out, and that is that, it might look like self-publishing is the most lucrative route, and that's true in strict percentages, but you have to consider whether, 100% of a small pie is less than 60% of a greater number of sales. So it's something to consider. We do have a tool on our website at wonderwell.press, a royalty calculator that you can use to compare what you would earn for similar thresholds of sales, both in store and direct, traditionally published versus hybrid publishing with Wonderwell. So, okay, I'm doing so good on catching up, aren't I? So this boils down to like kind of how should you publish your book? And, the answer is really that it depends. It depends on your goals. It depends on, here, I'm gonna stop screen sharing now. It depends on your goals. It depends on the type of book that you're writing, on your finances and the amount of personal effort and talent that you're able to bring to the project. So if being in brick and mortar stores is very important to you and you're writing on a popular topic and you have no budget or low budget to create the book yourself, and you have plenty of patience, you have more patience than money and a marketable concept, traditional publishing is the way for you to go. That's just the cleanest and simplest way I can encapsulate that. At the other end of the spectrum, if your book is primarily a marketing tool, or you're writing for a niche audience that doesn't typically buy this kind of book in store, and you have a way to sell to that audience directly, and you have some money to invest in the book, and you're prepared to manage a team yourself, then self-publishing is better. If, however, you want the in-store distribution and the direct sales, and you know that your book has consumer appeal and can compete in the stores, and you're in a position to make a full investment in the book, and you want a professional team to just handle it all, then hybrid publishing is your best option. Okay, so that's my presentation part, and now I'm here to answer your questions, Angie.
Okay. Let's just take some questions. We have some questions from people. I'll throw those into Jasmine, to be honest, if I miss any. So that was a great whirlwind of much more clarity than like you will get on the internet or through talking to friends. So like I wish I'd gotten that like much earlier in my process to be like, oh, I would have saved many hours of trying to figure it out before I got to you. So quick ones. Let's do some quick ones first. Do you need or have a literary agent for hybrid publishing?
So we do work with agents, but you don't need an agent to work with us. The way to work with a hybrid publisher is simply to submit your project. And you do need to be accepted by the hybrid publisher, but Wonderwell is really selective about who we work with, both in terms of category as well as quality. And so it's just a question of, if it's a fit and you can pay the fees, then it's a go. You don't need a literary agent to go forward.
Excellent. For the record, I did not have one or even think about that. So all right, cost. We've got a couple questions on cost. So are the costs up front in hybrid? What does full investment in the book mean? And what does it cost to get hybrid published?
Okay, well, that's great. Okay, so that's kind of like three questions in one. That's three facets of one question. So I can just speak to the way we run our business, and other hybrid publishers will differ in terms of their cost models. I know that we are kind of in a similar ballpark, at least when you look at the credible firms. So the actual cost, we don't do any kind of like pre-packaged sort of cut, sort of set fees. Everything is custom quoted because every book really requires a different set of services and attention. But typically, so yes, the costs are all up front. In essence, here's how to think of it. You will pay us just as you would pay like an agency to create a website for you, or run a campaign for you, or design something, make you an app or something. You will pay us for our publishing expertise and our editorial and design work and project management and all of that. So that is paid up front. Typically, the fees for that will come to somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000, depending on how much intensive editorial and design work needs to go into it and how long the overall project length is. Once the book is in the market, then our compensation model switches to a commission on sales. And that's essentially it's not even quite right to call it a commission, because what it is it's a fee for distributing the book. And most of what we collect, that 40% that we retain, most of it goes to our distributor to pay for the sales reps and the warehouses and the trucks, etc. So that's kind of how the cost model works out. We take installment billing as well. So typically we'll take like 15% down and then spread the cost over the lifetime of the project. So most of our clients' monthly fees will come somewhere between like $2,500 to $3,500. Sometimes it's quite a bit less, and very occasionally it's more if it's an intensive project over a short span of time.
All right, cool. That was very helpful. A couple other questions. So let's talk about expectations. So I mentioned earlier that I was shocked when I met you in, I don't know, it was like June or something, and you said that'll be a May release, and I'm like, what? How can it possibly take that?
You're like, but it's ready to go now. I can get it out there in 6 weeks' time. Yeah.
But then I learned there was this whole group of professionals that you coordinated and pulled in that needed. At the end, I feel like it was absolutely unnecessary to create the quality product that it is. But set people's expectations on the timing to actually do this.
Okay, so the most flexible and variable aspect of the process is the author's writing time, and then the second most variable time is the edit. So a lot depends upon how quickly you're going to write, how much work needs to be done, and then how kind of intensive the edit is going to be. We do work with people right from square one sometimes, and you came to us, Angie, with a manuscript already ready to go that went into developmental edit. And I think our developmental edit process with you was 2 or 3 months or something, but we very often work with people who are just starting from square one, like outlining the book, working within the ether with their concept. So the writing typically takes 6 to 9 months. And the edit typically takes at least 2 to 3 months, and sometimes longer if there's a lot of heavy revision to do or rewriting by the editor. That happens too. And then even at that point, it's ready to go into copy edit, which is just like grammar and spell check. But even that takes like a month or 2 to go through various like checking and, you know, various passes. Then it has to go to design, and that will take, you know, some time for the interior design to be established and agreed upon, and then it has to be typeset, and then it has to be proofread, and then sometimes there's an index to create, then it has to go into production. And so overall, from like start to finish, it will usually take about 9 months for a book that already exists, and like a manuscript that comes to us like ready to go into edit, and 12 to 18 months for someone who's writing from square one. That's just how long it takes. The other thing that we need to consider is that because we distribute to the trade, we have to adhere to those industry timelines and the sales reps schedule of meetings, which we can't, you know, affect. Like that's just when Barnes & Noble is they're buying spring books in November. So, or actually even earlier than that. So, so the book has to be listed as a book for that season a good 9 months ahead of pub date. So when people come to me and say, hey, I've got my manuscript, it's ready to go, can we get it into stores in 6 weeks time? It's like, no, like the answer is just no. Like those stores have already bought those books. They're already on the truck. Like they're now talking about books that are going to be published 9 months from now.
That's really important to understand. So along those lines, I was surprised to hear that I needed a lot more words on my manuscript when I brought it to you. I tend to be very concise. So how long should a book be?
Yeah, so it's interesting because reader appetites are changing, and you know we're all kind of getting used to shorter format writing. Used to be the rule of thumb was that a nonfiction book tended to be between 60,000 and 80,000 words. Now it's more like 50,000 to 70 or even lower. Like some books, there is actually quite an appetite for like books that are under 50,000 words, books that are like 40,000 words. I think that anything less than 40,000 words is starting to feel like a very slim volume, and readers will balk at paying full price for it. Even though we like to read short format, it just feels like, what do you mean, 20 bucks for this thing? It's only this thick. So in your case, you know, your illustrations really increase the page count. Obviously, those words stretch out over many more pages. And that increases consumer value appeal and value perception. But I think that your manuscript is like 30,000 when you first came to us, and we said you have to add another 10. And luckily you had like,
I feel like you told me I had to add like 15 or more. Like I feel like,
yeah, I think I wanted to get you into like 45,000 words, and in the end you did, and it's, you know what, it's not too much. It's like, it's great. So yeah, so that is how that works. Yeah, it should, I think these days, fall somewhere between, a nonfiction book should be at least 45,000 words, unless it is conceptually a short book. Like that exists too, and that's a whole different product that you're creating and positioning.
All right, so that was really important to know. Here's another really important thing for people to learn about. So a number of my friends have talked about writing books with multiple collaborators, multiple writers. What do you think about that?
So I hear this question a lot, and I have to say, I can't endorse it. I don't think, typically it's not a good idea.
Be honest with people.
I'm going to be honest. Yeah. Nobody here is going to get offended if I say what I really think and believe about this. So with the important asterisk and caveat that it completely depends on what your goals are. But if your goal is to make a name for yourself as a thought leader, then contributing to a multi-author book is not going to get you there. If your goal is to contribute a book that people will buy and read and recommend, and that will, you know, get traction and become known, it's probably not going to work either for that. Because what happens with a multi-contributor book is that a couple of logistical and conceptual issues there. So logistically, it's a nightmare to wrangle that kind of project. Like everybody is like late and they're on different timelines, and you know, and then the material comes in super uneven in terms of its quality, and like it just doesn't feel cohesive, and it can be really, really cumbersome. But that's just the logistical issue and kind of project management issue. Conceptually, it's more serious. Like basically what happens when you have a multi-contributor book is a book, in order to have value, like think back to the last 20, 30 books that you bought. You probably bought it because it was going to give you an in-depth experience of one idea deeply explored. Whereas a multi-author book will be like a chapter on this and a chapter on that and a chapter on that. And it just feels like a bunch of articles, like it doesn't hang together. That can be remedied if you have an incredibly strong editor who is keeping everyone focused on one kind of spine that is bringing it all together in a satisfying way and creating a kind of a narrative arc for the reader. So as I read it, I want to continue, and I'm going somewhere and I'm learning something. It just rarely works when you have a bunch of amateurs going like, let's all throw in a chapter. Like it just doesn't, you know. And then at the end of the day, you really have to think carefully about like, what is the legal structure for this project? Are we splitting the royalties 20 ways? Please don't do that. Like you'll want to kill yourself. Like, and you'll spend more on like accounting and bookkeeping than anyone will make on the book. So all of that said, I will say caveat, it might be worth your while to do that kind of project if what you really want is kind of calling card to give your clients and say, hey, look, I wrote this chapter in this book. And then it's more about sort of like, I don't know, having your name on a book. But if you have like a bunch of contributors, you're not going to put all 20 names on the book anyway, right? It's going to be dealt with differently. Usually there's one named author and everyone else is like credited inside. So it could be worth it, but not if you want to really be taken seriously or elevate your position as a thought leader.
All right, cool. That was important to talk about.
That was a long answer. I have a lot of feelings about that.
Well, and a lot of people ask that too, right? A lot of people are thinking that, they're asking that. You know, I had one friend I was talking to just the other day, like yesterday actually, and I told her your opinion on it. She's like, yeah, that's exactly like my experience. She's like, there were 5 of us and we were going to write a book together, and it just never went anywhere because it required them to actually figure it all out and work together. And they didn't even get to the point where they didn't have a single voice. They just, you know, just bits and pieces of ideas in the end.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's unsatisfying. And you know what, interestingly, fiction books also suffer from that. It is, I mean, it's different, but fiction anthologies where you have multiple short stories, they just are harder to sell. Readers don't just like, I want that random collection of stuff. Like you just don't typically feel as pulled to buy that book.
All right, I think we probably have time for one more audience question. Let's see. Can you describe what you originally envisioned what your book might be, or how hybrid publishing Wonderwell up-leveled it for you. Okay, so yes, how to describe that? It just looks a lot better than it ever would have, and comes together better. Because I imagine like a skeletal version of what I actually have, probably. Like, so I had a manuscript and I had what I wanted to say, and I was able to say it, but it wasn't as clean and it wasn't as comprehensive, and it definitely didn't have the professionalism of like, how do you layer in? Like we looked at the design earlier, right? How do you even do all that? And so, you know, at first I was like, so I had no experience with publishing at all, right? So at first I'm like, this is kind of expensive to do this. And then I thought about it and I thought, how much have I paid for school, right? So I have a number of degrees. How much have I paid for a class, to go to a class? And I started thinking about all the expertise that was being brought in and doing all that. That's what I got out of it. So, you know, the typesetting and the design, how to lay it out, and the editing, the professional editing to say like, think about this, move this around, try this, be more consistent here. I would have been less consistent. I would have had a lot fewer words. I don't know if I would have, like my pictures probably wouldn't have been as cleanly organized and like the same size or things like that. It probably would have been, Maggie would have just cringed at it probably with her experience. Like it probably looked okay to me, but it would look nothing like what it turned out to look like.
I'm really pleased to hear it. It's just super gratifying. You know, we are here to help people realize their vision and their dream and their goal. And I think that, you know, that's why I am really dedicated when I do these webinars to giving people just like the lay of the land. This is not like a sales pitch for hybrid publishing, because it might not be right for everyone who's listening. And I really, really want to help demystify and help people make the right choices. And that extends to, you know, the way that we take care of your books too, right? Like we're gonna do what you want, but we're gonna help steer you in the most productive direction too. So, okay, I think that we are wrapping. You're welcome. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, James. That's awesome. It's nice to see the positive messages in the chat. I am just going to screen share again for one little second. First of all, I just want to encourage you all to buy Angie's book. It's an excellent read. It's fun and entertaining as well as informative. And I hope that this webinar has given you a little bit of insight into the world of publishing. And like I said, it helped you to make some decisions of your own about how to go about getting your book published in a way that is right for you.
And if they have friends, what if they have friends who couldn't make the webinar today?
If they have friends that couldn't make the webinar, so we're going to be sending out this recording, and I think we're actually just going to put it up on YouTube too, so the whole entire world can enjoy it as well at some point. But certainly, certainly we like, encourage you to get in touch with us. I do have an offer for you all. I mentioned that earlier. So regardless of which publishing path you choose, you are going to need to start with a plan. It all centers on what the book is and, what your vision for it is and articulating that. So let me just share this for a sec. So yeah, so you need a plan. Okay, and we have developed a tool, a resource that we want to give away to everyone who joined us on this call today. This is our 18-page book plan template. So as I mentioned earlier, we provide concept development services to authors, and that is designed to help people work out what their book will be about, how it will be structured and positioned. And the product of that service is a 10 to 15 page book plan. So we want to give this to you as our gift for attending. This is not the same thing as undergoing our services, but at least you can take it and use it as a template to begin thinking about what you need to pull together and how you will organize that. You can use this template once you have it. You can use it to organize your content. You can use it as the basis of a book proposal if you do want to pitch traditional publishers. You can use it as a writing roadmap just for yourself, or a guide for your editorial and design helpers, or as a pitch document for supporters and investors and that sort of thing. I also want to offer you all a free 30-minute consultation with me. So if you download the book plan and fill it in, you can send it to us. There's going to be a link in that email where you can book a call with me. I will look at the content that you've put into your book plan template and give you my thoughts and advice on how best to publish for you. What we're going to be following up with, so 2 emails. You'll get one with the book plan template, and another one with the link of the recording, and also a brief survey. We really would be grateful for you to fill it out and let us know, what you thought of this webinar. And I think that we've got an ebook of Angie's book to give away to those who fill out the survey. So thank you all for joining us today. Oh my God, we are right on time with our completion. So I'm pretty pleased. Thank you to Jasmine and Sarah for helping to keep us on track. Angie, congratulations on becoming a published author. Thank you so much for working with Wonderwell and giving us the honor of being your publisher. It was great to talk to you today about your experience.
Thanks, absolutely. And people can feel free to message me on LinkedIn if you have more questions for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.